Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the garden. This is an awesome surprise today. Sarah Mumford, Laurel Quayhar, they own the New Leaf Florists in Norfolk, and they brought these to the door today. And wow, that was really awesome. Send somebody flowers. I highly recommend it. So thank you, New Leaf. So now everybody gets to enjoy them, although, oh God, they smell really good too. So tonight I thought I would start with the idea of how every story has a story. And at least for me, they do when I'm writing them. And we lived on our sailboat with our first two kids, Zoltan and Ian, aboard a sailboat for 6 years. And part of that time we lived in a place on the Gulf Coast, right outside of the 10,000 Island, called Goodland, Florida. Hey, Ray. Hey, Amy. Hey, everybody. Tommy. And there used to be this wonderful, wonderful woman there, and her name was Betty Bruno. She came from Washington, D.C. Let me see if I can show you Betty. This was Betty back in 1997. She was on an oxygen machine all the time. She had to have her oxygen with her. She lived in a little pink house. She was a journalist, and she and I became very close friends. And that was back in 1997, so a billion years ago. So at one point, once I moved back here and started writing my first book, Tell Me a Story, Betty became a very important part of it because when I was leaving, she gave me this lovely little book. It was called, what is it? Joy for the Journey. And in the front of that book, she wrote to me, Lisa, it's not likely I will see you again, but I will always look for your printed word. And that was in 1997, and she was true to that word because she passed not too long after that. And so this is her story, one of two stories, and it's called The Crane Stories. An old woman lived alone in a tiny pink house by the bay. Although she had no children or family of her own to be with her, she was never lonely, for she was a storyteller, and every day the children of the village would gather around her to listen. The woman's name was Betty. Every afternoon when the warm breeze blew across the bay, she and the children would sit under a palm tree, and Betty would tell them her crane stories. Betty began the telling the same way every day. When the days are long and my heart is sad, I sit by the water and I think. That is when the crane flies to me and tells me about his home in the sky. Everyone in the village knew that the home of the crane was the most beautiful place, more beautiful than any place on earth. It was a place filled with beautiful golden light all day, and the night, even in darkness, was deep and rich and beautiful. The crane could look down from his home and see every living thing, and he thought that everything he saw was worth visiting. Using his great white wings, the bird had flown all around the world and seen many things. Some were good, some made the crane very sad. I remember of an evening when the crane came to visit, and I could see that his feathers were wet from crying, Betty told. When I asked why he was so sad, he said he'd seen people treating each other badly. In some places, even they were fighting and hurting each other with words, and sometimes he saw them hurting with each other with more than words. This made some of the people hearing the story look away as they remembered unkind things that they had said or done. Why does the crane visit you and not us? One child asked. Does he think we're not worth visiting? Well, Betty said, once he told me that he visits everyone, but not everyone can see or hear him. Many people have seen him, but they thought he was just another bird. Some have seen him and shooed him away. I think that eventually everyone will see him when they're ready. That made the children very excited. Many of them had already seen the bird fly past. Some had even heard his voice. Unfortunately, many had never seen or heard him, and some were beginning to doubt that Betty had really seen him at all. Betty thought a while longer and added, "I think maybe he likes having me tell you all about him, and so he helps me see him just a little bit more clearly to make the telling easier." When one of the children asked the name of the crane, Betty said, "He has no name. He told me that if he allowed one person to give him a name, then people would believe he belonged only to that person. Since he wants to belong to everyone, he decided it would be better not to have a name." Betty went on telling her stories for many more years. The children at her telling tree grew up and had children of their own who came to listen. One day she was so old and so tired that she could not get up from her bed. Her heart was sad because she couldn't get up to tell her stories or even sit by the water to wait for the crane. She lay in bed and began to cry. Suddenly she heard a tapping at her bedside window. She reached over and opened the window. In flew the bird. "Oh, my friend," Betty said, "I was just too tired to look for you today." The bird was looking especially large and white. "You do not have to worry," he said. "You found me a long time ago. Now it's time for me to find you and bring you home to me." "Oh, no. I can't leave my village," Betty cried. "Who will tell the children about you?" The crane stretched his great wing over her bed, but instead of a shadow, he cast a great golden light. "Do not worry, old friend," he said. "I'll find someone to visit here when you have flown with me. I promise the stories will continue as long as there are children to listen." So we are keeping them going for Betty, especially today. I saw somebody say online the other day that stories are medicine, and we sure could use some preventive medicine right now, as well as some healing. And this is one that I particularly like. It's called the Tapestry. Weaving the tapestries was a long and painful process, not for the weaver, but for the threads. The threads, each individual spun from a different mix of fibers, spent their days and nights being twisted and thumped into position by the loom operated by Geo, the master weaver. Each knew that even after their place in the great design was finally settled and the tapestry finished, they would live out their lives being stepped on, sat on, and sometimes suffering the indignity of having various things spilled on them. Lucky ones were hung on the walls or placed in museums. Some threads began of the plainest cotton, but were dipped in brilliant hues or bleached white as the snow. Then there were the fine ones, blends of silk or those spun from silver or gold. Master Geo was well along in his day's work on a fine summer's afternoon when he heard a tiny sigh. He stopped his loom and listened. The sound came again, a sad little Now, Master Geo had some extraordinary qualities, and one of those was his ability to follow his creations throughout their lives. He knew the sigh he heard did not come from the room he was in, but from a place where one of his tapestries lived. To many, something so tiny as a sigh would pass them by or be dismissed. But Master Geo was not such a being. He could not go on with his work because that unhappy little sound just nagged at him. Now he listened very, very hard. He tried to pick out which of his creations had voiced the sound, and he heard the thread of a conversation. "This is so miserable, awful. Years pass, and the darkness still surrounds us," the little voice cried. "We are forgotten." Master Geo searched his memory for that little voice. It sounded very green, strong, satiny. The old weaver snapped his fingers just as he remembered the name from among the millions and millions he had woven. Weft. The weaver closed his eyes and pictured the beautiful tapestry in which Weft was a part. If memory served, it was not a very large one, a small gift given to the parents of a newborn. Alexa had been her name. Master Geo knew Alexa was destined for great things, and the gift had been made especially for her as a reminder of how beautifully dreams and reality could be woven together to bring joy. In this design were dozens of tiny sparrows and a blue heaven above. There was also a fine, large tree with golden apples hanging ripe on twisted branches. And a unicorn sat beneath that tree, with a tiny child standing beside it and stroking its brow. Master Geo smiled warmly at the memory. Now he thought about Weft. Where had that little thread fit into the pattern? Ah, yes. Weft was part of the long grass beneath the child's feet, soft and curling, as if a slight breeze would cause it to ruffle and tickle those little ankles and toes. A very lovely place to be, he thought, and Weft would have a very important memory to create for the child. Whatever could be wrong? Master Geo chose to investigate. He closed his eyes and he saw the tapestry. Before long, he was there in the child's room. He came in as a sunbeam and he warmed the floor. He scanned the room for signs of the tapestry, but could find none. Then he heard the child sobbing in a corner, and he stretched across the room to the dark and shadowy corner where she sat. He warmed her hair. It was Alexa, now 7 years old. She sat with her head on her knees, and she cried and cried. Now, old Master Geo knew better than to appear as himself to a child as old as 7. He might frighten the wits out of her. So instead he tried an old trick. He turned into a savannah sparrow, all covered in brown and white with little yellow eyebrows, and he perched on the windowsill and he began to sing a dreamy song. Alexa stopped crying and turned to the sweet music coming from her window. While a child of 7 might be frightened of old weavers popping into their rooms, they loved to sit and chat with little animals. The weaver knew that Alexa favored little birds. "Why do you cry?" the little bird sang. Alexa shrugged her shoulders. I've forgotten my favorite story, and Mama and Papa don't know it, she said. "What do you remember?" the bird sang. Alexa closed her eyes and tried to remember. "I remember colors and gold and silver and a beautiful tree," she said, but that's all. And since I forgot my favorite story, I've just been so sad." The sparrow cocked his head, and he looked carefully around the room again. The tapestry was indeed missing. The little sigh of Weft came again. This time, loud and clear, it came from another room. Quick as a flash, the little sparrow flew in the window across the room. Alexa squealed, "Mama, Mama, there's a wild bird loose in the house," she cried. At the age of 7, little girls can be terribly unpredictable. Master Geo had to work fast since Alexa's mother and father could be heard heading up the flight of stairs. The little bird sang to Weft, Little Weft, it's Master Geo come to help you. Make a sound so I can find you." Weft heard the master call and began to shout as loud as he could, Here, in the dark, in a box, help, help." The little bird flitted from the door top to the dresser, from the lampshade to the tabletop in its frantic search. Well, by now, Alexa's parents had arrived, and they began to chase after the little bird that had invaded their home. "Don't hurt it," cried Alexa's mother to the father. Alexa's papa called back, "I'll get a broom from the closet and shoo it back out the window." The moment the closet door was opened, the sparrow flitted inside, perched on a cardboard box, and began to sing. Everyone stopped. The dreamy sound took all of the panic out of the air and calmed all of them. "How very strange," said Alexa's mother. The singing stopped, and the bird nipped at the top of the box flap, and its beak flipped it open. Then it poked its head into the box and tugged at the corner of the tapestry. When enough of the tapestry was out of the box, the bird flew to Alexa and perched on her shoulder. Instead of squealing this time, she stood very still. The bird began to sing softly in her ear. Your lost story's in here, in every thread woven just for you. Then he flew to the mother's shoulder and sang, never pack your dreams away. Keep what is old to build the new. Like a tiny thread in a tapestry, every move matters in the mind of a child, and in the big picture too. Master Geo turned and flew back through the house, out Alexa's window, and back to his work. The three humans seemed to wake up from a dream. Alexa went to the closet and pulled the tapestry from the box. She laid it out on the floor and gasped, It's my story! My favorite story, she cried. The one Grandma told me. It's about the little girl who made friends with a unicorn by feeding it golden apples. See? All the little birds. Grandma said that the little girl could charm the birds from the trees. Alexa's mother and father knelt down and hugged her and the tapestry. Oh, we put that away when Granny passed because it reminded everyone of her, and we thought it would make you sad to see it, her father said. Granny gave you this when you were born. If you look at the grass by the little girl's feet, you can see where the thread was once pulled out, and Granny fixed it with what she liked to call loving stitches. That's what she called a rip or a tear that someone you love fixes for you. Suddenly, Alexa remembered her grandmother very, very clearly, and it made her feel warm and wonderful. She said, there's a story in every thread, Alexa remembered. She hugged the tapestry and smiled. Can we put it back on my wall? She asked. Her parents both nodded, and soon the tapestry was back in its place on the wall over Alexa's bed. Back in his workroom, Master Geo smiled as he recounted the day's happening to the piles of threads scattered all about him, while he wove a new tale into his latest tapestry. See how important a little green cotton weft plate in the larger design? Master Geo said. So shall you each have your own story before the world is done. And so it was that the Master Weaver went back to his work, and each thread waited eagerly to learn what kind of tale it would be. Yeah, I'm pretty sure stories are medicine. So I'm going to try and keep them coming to you as a special delivery every night. I hope that you'll share these with your friends and your neighbors, cousins and grandchildren. I'm going to put the YouTube link in the comments so that you can all find them offline for anybody who's not on Facebook. I love you all. Good night.